Japan is often listed among the safest countries in the world, a place where crime feels almost alien. But that sense of security can be deceiving, because when violence does erupt in the land of the rising sun, it's rarely ordinary. In societies where homicides are rare, the few incidents that do occur often involve exceptional motives and exceptional brutality, the result of years of repression, isolation, or quiet desperation finally breaking loose. Today, I'll be diving into a case that left Japan reeling: the Kato family murders, retracing the timeline, plotting the layout of the area, and examining the leading theories in an attempt to shed some light on one of the nation's darkest mysteries. This message is sponsored by Raycon. When I'm deep into a mystery, whether it's a real-world occurrence or something strange from the internet, I'm reminded how important it is to stay focused and alert. That's exactly why I use Raycon's bone conduction headphones, and now's the perfect time to check them out. Raycon is another year older, another year wiser, and are celebrating their birthday with 20% off these bone conduction headphones. They use off-ear audio, which means sound travels through vibrations in your bones. Your ears stay open to the world around you, while your music, podcasts, and calls come through crystal clear. I use my pair on walks, while doing errands, or even while editing. They keep me focused without cutting me off from the world, and with 13 hours of battery, IP68 waterproofing, and a secure no-bud fit, they're built to handle whatever my day throws at them. Over 3 million people already use Raycon, and for good reason. You get premium quality without the premium price tag, backed up by a 30-day happiness guarantee. So click the link in the description, or go to buyraycon.com/masqueradebc to get 20% off the bone conduction headphones. Brought to you by Raycon. It was Tuesday, September 7th, 2004, and a typhoon warning had just been issued in Aichi Prefecture, central Japan. 8-year-old Shogo Kato and his classmates had been sent home early from elementary school, not that any of them were complaining. Shogo in particular was excited about the time off. In just 2 days, it would be his 9th birthday, so this unexpected break felt like an early present. As he walked home through the quiet, residential neighborhood of Kutsukake in Toyoake City, he neared his 2-story detached home, which he shared with his mother, Toshio, father, Hiroto, elder siblings, Yuki and Rina, and the family's latest addition, Shiba Inu, Jackie. The family had thought it wise to invest in a guard dog, and it was a good thing that they did. In recent months, a few unsettling occurrences had put the Katos on edge. Several suspicious men had been sighted roaming their quiet street. On top of that, somebody had broken into the family car, let the air out of Rina's bicycle tires, and in one chilling instance, while both parents were out of the house, tried to open the front door. Shogo had been home at the time, and had yelled out to whoever was on the other side of the door to get away. And now, as he greeted his dog at the edge of the property, his eyes were drawn to a small piece of graffiti that had recently appeared. A strip of pink paint smeared vertically on the northeast corner of the wall surrounding the household. But the child's concerns were quickly replaced with happier thoughts of balloons, presents, and the cake that his mother had no doubt baked him, as she did every year. And so he brushed off his worry and ran inside to check on the preparations. The storm arrived and passed without incident, and by the evening of September 8th, the skies were surprisingly clear. Few streetlights lined Kutsukake, but a particularly bright moon meant visibility was good. Inside number 165, Toshio, Shogo, Yuki, and Rina spent the evening watching TV and finalizing the next day's birthday celebrations. The man of the house, Hiroto, was working overtime on a particularly time-consuming project in Nagoya. He was a municipal employee and often had to stay at the office late into the night. As such, he wasn't home when the nightmare unfolded. At around 9 PM, Hiroto sent his wife, Toshio, a text telling her that he'd be working through the night so that he could take a day off for Shogo's birthday. At 11 PM, he called Toshio and reminded her to keep a spare key out for him in the usual spot. Their conversation was brief and unremarkable, aside from the fact that it was the last time Hiroto would ever speak with his wife. At approximately 4 AM on September 9th, neighbors heard female screaming coming from the Kato residence. It sounded like Toshio. This was quickly followed by, quote, the sound of people running around. Less than 30 minutes later, at around 4:25 am, those same neighbors were again awoken by the smell of smoke. The Kato house was on fire. Hiroto's brother, who happened to live nearby, contacted Hiroto on his office line and told him to come home immediately, saying his home was ablaze and his loved ones were nowhere to be seen. Hiroto immediately began making the hour-long journey back from Nagoya. As soon as he arrived, he began rushing towards his smoke-filled house, desperately calling out for his family, but firefighters managed to hold him back. The fire was finally extinguished at sunrise, and had burned so fiercely that the steel columns of the home had bent. When it was safe to do so, investigators entered the building, which, in their words, was as hot as a sauna. Inside, they came upon a scene of pure carnage. Inspired by fellow YouTuber Rhetorica, who's made a well-researched deep dive into this mystery of his own, I've drawn up a floor plan of the property based on media descriptions, news broadcasts, and a Daterebi Side B reconstruction. The house consisted of 2 floors. On the first level were 3 main rooms. A kitchen area, accessible through this east side door, a traditional Japanese-style room, and a Western-style living space. In that living room, responders discovered the body of the youngest son, Shogo, in their words, in a half-cremated state, smouldering and unrecognizable. As detectives would later learn, he had been struck once in the head with a blunt metal object, and his cause of death was determined to be cerebral contusion. It soon became clear that this hadn't been an accidental house fire as everyone expected. The boy had been callously murdered on his 9th birthday and set alight. But he was far from the only victim. On the second floor, they found his older brother, Yuki. He too had been killed by a single blow to the head, which had caused an acute subarachnoid hemorrhage. Curiously, a blanket had been draped over his lifeless body. In contrast, the female victims had been dispatched more violently, more personally. Both were found outstretched in their respective bedrooms. Toshio had been stabbed and slashed more than a dozen times in the back and face, while Rina had been stabbed nearly 10 times in her back and other places. The wounds on both women were around 3 centimeters wide, with deep punctures from their backs to their lungs, and they had been stabbed hard enough to break their ribs. Since there was no sign of metallic chipping, police say a hard survival knife with a length of around 20 centimeters must have been used. Just like Yuki, both Toshio and Rina had been covered with blankets. The state of the bodies was confusing to say the least. Why had only the female victims been viciously stabbed? Why had Toshio, Yuki, and Rina been hidden under blankets, but not Shogo? For that matter, why was Shogo the only one found on the first floor and not in his bedroom when he wasn't allowed to stay up late by himself? And why had he been burned much more thoroughly than the others? Despite the commotion overheard by neighbors, there was no evidence of any defensive wounds, and it's believed that each family member was asleep when they were attacked. The use of different weapons suggested multiple perpetrators working in unison, though detectives couldn't rule out a well-prepared lone killer being the culprit. After bludgeoning and piercing their victims, the intruder, or intruders, then placed kerosene-soaked newspaper throughout the home in an apparent attempt to burn out the interior and destroy any bloodstains, fingerprints, footprints, or skin fragments. Terrifyingly, various quantities of black soot was found in the lungs of each victim, indicating that they were all still breathing when the fire was set. Detectives attempted to reconstruct the killer's movements, but unfortunately, due to the amount of fire damage, they struggled to do so effectively. Both the front and side doors to the property were locked, and there was no sign of a forced entry. The windows on the ground floor had melted, so at first, they believed that the intruder must have gained access through one of them, most likely this window at the rear of the property, as the shutter was partially raised. But neighbors pointed out that that was unlikely. Toshio obsessively kept all of the doors and windows at ground level locked to protect her kids from any would-be intruders, and certainly wouldn't have left one open. Yuki's second floor window had been open at the time, but there was no evidence that a ladder had been used to gain access. Given that the youngest victim, Shogo, had the least amount of soot in his lungs, and that he was found on the first floor, it stands to reason that he was attacked first, and that the killer or killers had truly entered on the ground level. Toshio had kept a secret key out in the storage shed as per her husband's request, but investigators found it in the exact same spot where she had left it. If the killer had used it, he had put it back very carefully as to confuse the investigation, and had locked the door behind him before fleeing into the night. Investigators initially thought that this was a home invasion gone wrong, with the pink paint being used to mark the property out, but they struggled with the lack of motive, and there had to be one, because this house hadn't been selected at random. It was surrounded by a maze of roads, other residential buildings, and farmland, in a quiet area far from the town centre. That's to say, the Katos had been intentionally targeted by someone familiar with this area. But the family had received no direct threats prior, and though a few drawers had been opened, the only item stolen from the home was the dog's collar. Why kill the sleeping occupants, only to run off empty-handed? The only rational explanation is that whoever snuck into the Kato home in the early hours of September 9th did so for one reason, and one reason only: to kill everyone inside. The sheer brutality and effort made to cover up the crime indicated that this was a meticulously planned hit. The person or people responsible had come well prepared. For instance, Luminol revealed no traces of blood outside the property, indicating they had brought a spare change of clothes with them so that they could burn their blood-soaked outfits at the scene. Neither of the weapons were ever found. No cameras captured their movements. They were in and out within 30 minutes, and they had brought their own kerosene to ensure that none of their DNA got left behind. This was a near-professional job, and without a witness, it would be hard to pin it on anybody. And frustratingly, the sole survivor who could actually shed some light on this mystery wasn't talking. Not because he didn't want to, mind you, but because he couldn't. The Kato family's dog, Jackie, had been found cowering under their car in the driveway, no doubt having witnessed the nightmare unfold. As one detective put it, "I often seriously wonder how great it would be to be inside that dog's eyes and brain." Yet ironically, it was Jackie's silence that gave investigators their strongest lead. The Katos had been training Jackie to be a guard dog, keeping him by the front entrance during bedtime hours. Shiba Inu are a particularly alert breed, and as expected, Jackie would always bark whenever a stranger approached. On the night of the slayings, though, the locals hadn't heard so much as a peep out of him. Yet somebody had unchained him by removing his collar. Someone he either trusted enough, or feared enough, not to bark at. With that in mind, the detective's attention turned towards his master. Hiroto Kato had always been regarded as a caring family man and doting father, but when investigators began digging into him, they discovered that he had actually been living a double life. Though it's true Hiroto often arrived home late from work, it wasn't always because of overtime. After clocking off, he would often visit upscale hostess clubs with colleagues and chat with beautiful women for hours on end, spending tens of thousands of yen per visit, and often sending his favourite hostesses additional money as gifts. As he would later admit, he'd become obsessed with, quote, escaping into a glamorous place that wasn't available to him at home. It was later rumoured that Hiroto had become romantically involved with a young Filipina who was working at one such club. According to some reports, he had become deeply infatuated with her, to the point that he was considering divorcing Toshio and starting a new life. Some sources claim that he spent a significant amount of money on her, as much as 400,000 yen per month. Whether or not this woman reciprocated his feelings is unclear, as many hostesses engage in papakatsu, in English, gold-digging behaviour. As I mentioned in my Airi Sato coverage, many of these hostesses enter into relationships with customers for monetary gain. But it was clear to investigators that on Hiroto's end at least, the emotional investment was real. The strain this placed on his marriage was significant. Toshio had allegedly confided in a friend about Hiroto's coldness and absence. Some even claimed that she suspected the affair because Hiroto never seemed to have any money anymore. Hiroto's relationship with his children, especially the older two, had reportedly grown distant too. But was there actually any evidence that he was behind the familicide? Well, just 20 minutes before the female scream was heard coming from the Kato household, At 3:40 am, a truck driver spotted a blue passenger vehicle roughly 200 meters from the crime scene. The trucker was struck by the fact that it bore an Owari Komaki license plate, the same area where Hiroto's workplace was located. That seemed unusual at such a late hour. While the inferno raged, firefighters noticed a similar green vehicle with an Owari Komaki plate drive past the Kato house, with a man in his 30s or 40s at the wheel. Could this have actually been Hiroto? Well, probably not. Hiroto actually had an alibi. Not only were his plates not Owari Komaki, as he didn't actually live in Nagoya, but one of his co-workers confirmed that he was indeed at the office when the nightmare took place. Something this co-worker may have been covering for Hiroto, perhaps to hide the fact that they were both at a hostess club. But I guess working on a project at 4 am isn't that implausible, given Japan's slightly over-the-top work culture. It's also worth remembering that Hiroto's brother contacted him on his office number rather than his personal phone, seemingly confirming that he was indeed an hour's drive away in Nagoya, though there's no information about whether the police actually looked into his call records. Despite lingering public suspicion, Hiroto was never charged. Not in connection with this case at least. In 2005, 1 year after the loss of his family, Hiroto Kato was arrested on charges of fraud and embezzlement. He had reportedly stolen over 10 million yen from his company, money which he blew on his favourite hostess. In court, he pled guilty, his only excuse being that he was a weak man. He was given a suspended sentence, in part because his defense argued that he was treated very roughly by investigators during his interrogation. While questioning him about the embezzlement, they had reportedly tried to get him to confess to his family's slayings, and apparently caused him so much stress that he began stabbing himself in the leg with a pen. Since then, Hiroto has kept out of the public eye, and I don't just mean he turns down TV interviews. Aside from the 2004 funeral, he hasn't turned up to any memorial events for his wife and children, and even refuses to hand out flyers alongside other Kato family members, which obviously isn't a great look. Investigative journalist Miki Kato, no relation, met with him to ask why he doesn't campaign for answers about his family's deaths. He replied, "No matter what I do, I'll still be seen as a suspect. It's the police's job to solve cases. I don't want to cooperate with the police. I don't want to have anything to do with them again. I want to be left alone. I'm scared of the media, and I'm scared of you coming here. No matter how reasonable the arguments you make, I have no intention of cooperating. I don't care what people out there who don't know me think. I just want those who know me to believe me." Miki Kato has actually been looking into this case since the very beginning, and has been one of the few journalists able to speak with the people involved and those affected. That includes the detectives working the case, and in one article, she brought to light a very bizarre development. About 2 years after the incident, a man referred to as T, who was being interrogated at Aichi Police Headquarters in connection with a different case, suddenly claimed, "I know who the perpetrators of the Toyoaki case are." T accurately picked out photos of both Toshio and her husband's mistress, even though he had no known connection to either of them, selecting them from among a large set of women's photographs. He named 4 or 5 individuals as the perpetrators, including Yakuza members and foreign nationals. He claimed they had made a duplicate key to the Kato house, and said that he had gone with them there beforehand to check whether the key fit. He also reportedly drew an accurate sketch of the surrounding layout. The Special Investigation Headquarters was electrified by this, and spent months investigating T's story. However, over time, that story began to change, with T appearing to tailor his statements to match what he thought investigators wanted to hear. In the end, his testimony was ruled unreliable and thrown out. Detectives who supported the theory of a lone perpetrator dismissed his claims entirely, but Miki believes there may be some truth in T's story. As she wrote in a 2024 article, one former detective from the 1st Investigation Division said to me, "I believe there was a reason this crime happened on September 9th. I can't say more than that." Then he warned me, "Don't get carried away and dig too deep. You might get yourself killed." And with that, he hung up. Why did it have to be on the 9th? What was the significance of that date? Mickey's retelling of T's story has since reignited public interest in the case. Online, people continue to speculate why a group of Yakuza might want to wipe out a mother and 3 children. Could Hiroto have angered a gang member at one of the upscale clubs he frequented, perhaps by messing with one of their women, or failing to repay a debt? Could Hiroto himself have been the target, but just so happened to be out that night? Could Hiroto have been the one to hire their services, using the last of his remaining cash? Could a jealous hostess have wanted his wife and kids out of the picture? Since T's story remains unconfirmed, those theories too are nothing more than speculation. Speculation that the authorities aren't willing to entertain. They've since stated that they want to prioritize ongoing cases rather than past ones. The Kato house was preserved for a time, in case forensic breakthroughs meant new evidence could be recovered, but it was later demolished due to structural damage, young vandals compromising the scene, and a consensus among detectives that this case will likely remain unresolved. One person who refuses to let this story fade from people's memory, though, is Toshio's sister, a woman who goes by the pseudonym Amami Toshi. From day one, Amami has been determined to avenge her sister, niece, and nephews. She was among the members of Sora no Kai, the organization which successfully campaigned to have the statute of limitations abolished for capital offences, ensuring that killers can no longer run down the clock. She and other Kato family members gather at Kutsukake every September 9th to hand out flyers, spread awareness, and tell those who will listen about the 4 people who can no longer share their stories. Toshio was a devoted mother who, by all accounts, lived for her children, working hard not just as a full-time parent, but as a part-time pizza shop and racetrack employee. Though she struggled to make ends meet, her kids never went without, and she always remained cheerful and gentle. Yuki was a natural sportsman who took part in countless after-school activities, such as karate classes, and who was the captain of the track and field club. He was a superfan of the actress Aya Ueto. After the incident, a class anthology was filled with words that reflected Yuki's character. He was a person with great leadership skills and was full of motivation. In the mummy's words, Yuki lived his 15 years on Earth as if he were rushing through them all at once. There must have been so much he wanted to do, which is why I fear he can't rest in peace. His soul must be wandering. His old karate teacher, M-sensei, was extremely affected by the death of his student. The violence that befell him was far beyond anything M had ever imagined. The suddenness, the unexpectedness, the impact of the loss. He felt like he had failed his student and considered giving up karate altogether, but decided to continue with a different approach. M-sensei now teaches women and children basic self-defense techniques with a focus on immediately useful moves when encountering sudden evil, such as training them to instinctively make the correct split-second decisions, to scream, to brush off the hand that grabs you and run away. Like her brother, Rina too was athletic, was a setter on her high school volleyball team, and was a great admirer of Kurihara Megumi, a member of the Japanese national team at the time. She was also musical and creative, and loved playing the piano and making accessories. Like Toshio, she had a nurturing personality, and she often looked after her younger brother, Shogo. Her mummy had hoped that she would one day grow up and fall in love, but she never got to experience that. Rina's passing inspired her best friend, Y, to become a nurse and help save lives as a way to honour her. As for Shogo, even from a young age, he had a sense of justice, a sense that was perhaps inspired by his favourite hero, Ultraman. In a time capsule dug up after the incident, he had left an illustration. On the back, he wrote how he one day hoped to become a police officer. To begin with, Amami would make offerings of juice to Shogo to commemorate his birthday, but on what would have been his 20th, she began offering him a beer. His best friend grew up to become a policeman himself, and says that they would have been great partners. As for the family dog, Jackie, Amami took him in. You'll be happy to hear that his life was peaceful from then on. He passed away in 2016. Locals still remember the Kato family. They remember the children's school events, the cheerful dog in the yard, the sound of life that once echoed from the house. Now it's just an empty lot, one which a mummy visits every year. Hiroto has yet to join her. A huge thank you to my supporters here on YouTube and over on Patreon, especially my biggest supporters: Holly Lyons, Thomas Almond, Alana Pons, Asia Mina, Alicia 1996 Fee, Azriel Warakai, Adelstein Trusterson, Colin Munsma, Connell Lotham, MZs, Farewell Tattoos Jack FL, George Lopez, Gina Valera, Grace Archie, Hamish, John Stuart Muller, Lucy Krishnada, Michelle F. Granfield, Misty Blue Longi, Orlando Torres, Peter Loldrage, Svisso Skivcool, TNS Mum, Terry Ford, and Geokai. Thank you guys so much for your continued support. Remember to hit that like button, and I'll see you all again very soon.